Well, after days of ignoring mounting questions in the Australian newspaper about her integrity as a young lawyer 17 years ago, the Prime Minister has broken her silence in dramatic style. In a lengthy press conference triggered by an apology from the Australian for a story it ran today, Julia Gillard answered the allegations against her and ridiculed the misogynist and nutjobs on the internet who she says revived them. Political correspondent Tom Iggulden reports from Canberra.
If you've got questions, put them.
Julia Gillard's been dodging the latest allegations about her conduct 17 years ago at the law firm Slater and Gordon until today.
This will be the only occasion on which I deal with this matter. I am not going to dignify it by ongoing answering of questions.
The change of heart came after an apology from the Australian for a story it ran today and then retracted.
The Australian newspaper today asserted that I created a trust fund that is wholly untrue and seriously defamatory.
Julia Gillard did offer legal advice about an election fund for her then boyfriend, Australian Workers' Union official Bruce Wilson. It was later allegedly used to siphon money for his personal use, but there's never been evidence that Julia Gillard had any knowledge of that. Attempts to tie the Prime Minister to the scandal are not new, and neither was the result. The Australian printed and retracted a similar story on the weekend before the 2007 election, and it fired columnist Glenn Milne after he revived it for a second time last year.
It's very, very hard to explain why 3 times these defamatory allegations would come around when on every occasion News Limited has ended up apologising for them and retracting them.
But the Australian published some new details this time around, including that Julia Gillard did not open a file on Slater and Gordon's computer system about her advice to Mr Wilson.
It was par for the course to routinely provide free advice to union officials and trade unions.
And a transcript of an interview with her bosses just before she left the firm reveals she described the election fund as a slush fund.
Terminology with a particular overtone to it, which I don't think helps with understanding these events. It wasn't the best choice of words.
What was not new in the Australians' coverage were references to the Prime Minister's separation from Bruce Wilson after corruption allegations against him surfaced. On this, the Prime Minister's defence turned to attack.
There's some material in today's Australian which would lead people to believe that our national newspapers are for Mills and Boon style recounts of words spoken between people who were formerly in a close relationship. It's not my intention to canvass those matters.
Julia Gillard said in the past that Mr Wilson took advantage of her naivety.
It might seem a bit odd for who were on that defence to people, you know. It wasn't like you were off the first train from Adelaide, for instance.
I can... how old are you? How old are you?
32.
Right. Let me assure you, you'll know a lot more by the time you're 50 than you do now.
But the Prime Minister saved her strongest words for Larry Pickering, a former political cartoonist who's been publishing claims on his website that she says fed the Australian stories.
Will the misogynists and the nutjobs on the internet continue to circulate them? Yes, they will. And it wouldn't matter what I said, and it wouldn't matter what documents were produced, and it wouldn't matter what anybody else said. They will pursue this claim for motivations of their own which are malicious and not in any way associated with the facts.
Julia Gillard says it's not worth her while to sue the former bankrupt.
He would still be propagandising sexist and vicious stuff about me till the end of time. It's to do with this, you know, sort of Americanisation of our politics, this eccentric lunar right Tea Party style interventions.
At their base, these allegations were an attack on the Prime Minister's character, questioning her legal ethics and suggesting guilt by association with union sleaze. But if they achieved anything today, it was to blow apart the Prime Minister's political shell, to reveal a defiant and engaging leader, all too often hidden from public view. All too quickly, though, it was back to politics as usual.
Hello, Tony.
G'day, how are you, Julia?
Me too.
After an observation from the Resources Minister about yesterday's cancellation of the Olympic Dam mine expansion.
You've got to understand the resources boom is over.
This is a real problem for the government. It undermines their whole economic strategy.
Order.
Julia Gillard tried to explain the minister had only meant mineral prices had come off a bit.
And that the export boom in resources still has a very long way to run.
We've got a record pipeline of investment in the resources sector.
The irony was dripping
as they uttered the words that we have record investment, and yet $50 billion was cancelled yesterday.
But Tony Abbott was also on the back foot after his admission yesterday he hadn't read BHP's press release about the decision, which didn't mention the carbon tax or the mining tax.
I grew up in South Australia, and that is why I am personally offended by the fact the Leader of the Opposition can't be bothered spending 1 minute reading 600 or 700 words about the future of South Australia.
This is false. I read it at about 3:45 yesterday afternoon.
He read it, then he forgot he read it, and then he said he had read it, then he said he hadn't read it.
Parliament now begins a 2-week break. Tom Miggleton, Late Line.